to opt out at this time if you don't want to be recorded, but it will help us because we're sort of bad note takers, shall we say. Okay, great. Okay, and then any other some other housekeeping things. We will try to ask you to stay on mute when you aren't speaking so that it doesn't cause feedback in the main screen. Please raise your hand. There's an electronic way. Most of us are getting used to that by this time, but otherwise feel free to just wave too, and our trustee monitors will be watching for you, or just blurt out if you want to say something. We've decided that the most productive way to have the meeting tonight will be to allow Matt and Jody to speak first, and then so we'll hold questions until that. Are you seeing the transcript okay, Blair? I think yes, hopefully. And then we'll pull those questions forward. Okay, thank you, Blair. After that initial introduction, and then we'll have more time for just free and open discussion. We know it's kind of hard with everybody on the call at one time with multiple screens, that we are going to kind of try to stay on top of that rather than break out, because Matt and Jody are really interested in hearing what everybody says. So don't feel bad or weird about repeating what other people have said. It helps them prioritize what your ideas are and what might be the best directions to take going ahead. So we chose to go that way tonight. We might not do that in future, but for now, that's where we're going to go. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody. So you might have noticed the Highland Park Improvement Club board has been doing a few things over the past, since our last town hall. 2 containers dropped onto the building site, and we put up some more fencing in order to keep the monkey business outside the fence and not on the club property. We are still grappling with how to hold events to welcome the community during our closure, which we're hoping we'll be able to do something for New Year's Eve. And Nicole is going to follow up with that detail at the end of the meeting. And then the most exciting news, of course, is that we've selected architect to help design the new HPIC, 2021, and for the next 100 years. So what are our criteria? So there was a group of folks that got together as a subcommittee, and our criteria for selecting a designer was, we had several things. First of all, close ties to the Highland Park Improvement Club and to Highland Park itself. The architect needed to be interested in the project. We were looking for some commercial structural remodeling experience from the architects. Folks who might be willing to consider some fee considerations along in the spirit of our HPIC volunteerism tradition. Experience with the public engagement process like we have now happening. And then able and willing to work on a sort of a budget. And a great example of that is their award-winning townhome project over on 9th, which came in on a lower end, which is really great. We'd like to, not break our total bank on this if possible. We're looking for somebody visionary about the next 100 years for an HPIC building. And then for somebody where the project has meaning for the architects as well as the community. I feel like this is a great, they've expressed a great interest in this project, and it really allows their practice to develop and increase. So all those things seemed really well suited to the Wittman Estes firm, which is represented tonight here together on one screen for us. Matt Wittman and Jody Estes of Wittman Estes. They met all the criteria, and plus they live in Highland Park and they enjoy attending Highland Park Improvement Club events, which incentivizes them to get this done fast and soon so that we can all get back into our building and meet again in person. Sorry. And The other interesting thing too is their work is it together as an integrated look at both the building and the exterior space, which we've been moving towards more and more over time, where the people use the indoor outdoor sort of aspect of the space with the garden. So Matt focuses on the building environment, and then Jody works more in the landscape area as a landscape designer. An architect. So we think this will be a great approach for HPIC. And with that, I'm going to shut up and turn the meeting over to Matt and Jody. So welcome, and welcome to Highland Park. Wait, oh, you've lived here 15 years. Okay. Hey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kay and Julie and everyone on the board. Jody and I are both super honored to be selected and super happy about this opportunity. Like Kay said, we've been living here for 15 years and love the neighborhood and have been going to HPIC for many years. And so really understand the opportunity to have this heart of the community that HPIC brings people together from both the immediate environs and even kind of broader people even outside of Highland Park come as well. So we're very happy to be here, and also really excited about, on the one hand, saddened by the fire, but excited about building from the ashes and opportunities that can come out of that, and to build something even better than what was there before. So the purposes of tonight's meeting is mainly about the community, to get feedback from the neighborhood, from all of you, about what's possible there. So tonight we're going to be talking about mainly opportunities that you might have in your minds, some initial thoughts that Jody and I and our team at Estes have found. And it's really about getting feedback from you all about what level of aspiration do we see here? How big do we want to go with the ambition about what can happen, and what are some kind of changes that can be easily brought in with existing things that we have to work with. So I'll start sharing screen, go through a couple of things here. So first we'll just talk a little bit about the process. So we're in the kind of what we call pre-design programming phase. So in this first phase, it's not really about designing. It's not really about like the roof shape or the layout of the building. It's more about understanding the situation that we're given with the existing building, the footprint, the zoning, the structural realities, just the kind of nuts and bolts of what are there. And then fundamentally, I'm getting feedback from the neighborhood and the community about what might happen there before we start putting pen to paper and really laying out designs, which we'll look at next time. We first want to gather community feedback about what's possible. So we're trying to move it along quickly through pre-design programming concept phase. And then the next time we meet, we'll be looking at some concept design, schematic design, and then moving through the process. Right now, the window of opportunity is really wide open about, really anything's possible, within what the city can allow us to build. And then as we go through the process, we'll start to narrow down and refine. So really now is the time to think big and define what's possible. And then through the spring, we'll be getting more into the technical details. So we'll take about 15 minutes and kind of roll through some initial thoughts. So we'll talk about the site, some of the existing plans that existed for the building, and report on what we know about what might be saved and what is a total rebuild. And then we have kind of a two-part discussion. First is more about aspirations. What is the next 100 years want to look like for the building? What changes might happen? What are the kind of bigger picture ambitions of the building? And the second part is more the specific survey questions, which were sent out, and that can be also a structure for feedback. So first off, the site. As you all know, we are on Holden Street, and it was already a quite visible throughway. And then with the bridge going down, that has become an even more highly visible access route running east-west between Highland Parkway, 16th Avenue and Delridge. So I think one thing that's special about the location is that it gets, it's fairly central within the neighborhood. So it draws foot traffic, bike traffic, as well as cars. And then for people even that don't live here, you get a lot of visibility from people driving by. So we feel like there's this opportunity to reach out to the broader Highland Park community by the nature of its visibility and the fact that people go by and see it very prominently. And then as you get closer, we find ourselves between 11th and 12th Avenue, with the alley, Holden Street on the south. And the one thing that we've been thinking about and noticing is that how the neighborhood has changed since the original building was built, almost 100 years ago. Highland Park was populated by much smaller buildings, a lot of worker housing, smaller houses, smaller lots. But as the neighborhood has developed and townhomes have become the predominant building type along Holden and Highland Park Way, the building today finds itself rather on the small side of some of the neighboring buildings. So just thinking about the size of the building and the height, and what does the building want to say, and what feels like the right size relative to what is a densifying and growing set of buildings around it. So within the block plan itself, we have Holden Street on the south, the alley, the parking, rain garden, and then the courtyard. And so one thing we're excited about is with the new build is getting even more connection to the courtyard, which has been so wonderfully designed and installed. And it's one of the, I think one of the most well-used parts of the building. And so working with Jody and the community, we want to really have the building embrace the courtyard and have more connection. And then the alley side historically was the loading side, and also a little bit, I don't know what the right term for it is, maybe a little bit dark, a little bit underused, and that's maybe an opportunity to be more thoughtful about how the alley is used for functional loading, and also have better security along that edge. So then some three-dimensional views. Here you see the southeast and southwest corners. So we're excited about the idea that these corners might be more open. You see the courtyard, solar panels facing south. So as we start to think about the roof shapes and what might happen, we want to think about solar opportunity for solar panels. There you see the townhomes. So you can see the roof lines are generally closer to 30 feet on the neighboring buildings. And the view from the alley side. And so this is something that we've been thinking about, like when you're driving west along Holden Street, you see this corner first. And so, right now it's a fairly opaque corner. So maybe there's an opportunity there to have that corner be more visible signage and activity facing to the community as you travel north. So then the view from the street, this is heading west along Holden. And as you see, when you're driving by or even walking, the townhomes tend to be like the defining shape, the defining form of the architecture around the street. So one thing we're pondering is this idea of like, what is a community home, or what is a community house? What does the club want to say formally in terms of the shape, how it's rendered, how, when you see the building, do we want it to look like something different than the housing around it? Like, because there's an opportunity as a different building type to have a different statement as it relates to the townhomes that are next to it. And so as you get closer, you see like the 30-foot high townhomes, each pick height, and then the townhomes beyond. So you're sort of sitting between the two. And it's also kind of cool how the road has a curve and a crest. So this, it's also kind of quite, it's very special in a way, the way that it sits kind of on the top of the hill before you drop back down. And the south frontage, so there's a lot of great stuff happening with the signage and the sign that the blue stripe that was on the building. So we're thinking about on the south frontage, how can that be reimagined as something that is more pedestrian friendly and maybe has a visual access as you walk along the sidewalk. And then on the southwest corner, there had been this discussion of maybe that southwest corner is like a direct access, like a third place with a maybe coffee shop or a community facing thing. So instead of going into the courtyard and then into the building, perhaps this corner could be a more community facing corner. And then the corner on the southwest of the courtyard, one of the most beloved spaces, outdoor space. So we want to have the new building further open up to that. And then this photo, which Peter took from the neighboring building, what Peter and Kay were calling this golden moment, this idea that the very glowing, the party lights in the courtyard, and this really being the heart of the project, that you're kind of protected while you have a lot of movement around you. This is a very kind of protected interior experience that can then lead you into the building. Okay, so then next we will just look quickly at the existing plans and some more technical realities of what exists there now. So this was the addition from 1980. So there was an existing building that was built, and then an addition in 1980 was built with a more modern reinforced footing. And so those are the plans that we're working with. So to orient people here, so the original footprint is here, and then so that was built almost 100 years ago. So the foundation and the footings of those, and just the kind of the lifespan of the building itself, is probably was not as intact as the West Addition. So the West Addition, which was built in the early 80s, had a modern footing, and because of the way that the fire happened, the initial assessment is that the West Addition is partially salvageable, and then the original footprint is probably a total loss, both because of the extent of the fire and also the condition of the existing footings would be very difficult to try to reuse. So the working theory is that the project would scrape the original footprint, further assess what can be saved with the West Addition, and then go from there. So here you can see this is the original footprint over here, and then the West Addition. So as we get further into it, we'll have to kind of study how that happens, because what we've sometimes seen in construction and architecture is it can sometimes cost more money to try to salvage something than it would be just to start over. So we want to study carefully, like when we're salvaging part of it and rebuilding new, like what that transition looks like and how we can navigate that. So we've got some great resources with local contractors on the board that we can advise with to answer some of these questions. So here you see the West Addition, partially salvageable, the original footprint along the alley. The plan is to totally rebuild that new. So the next we want to talk about some initial opportunities. So these were thoughts that some people in the community had been sharing, and then some things with the board and some of with Estes' initial thoughts from some things that might happen that are more big picture. So starting along the south, the southwest corner.
Yeah, if you want to. I don't know, because I tried.
Like a coffee shop, a community access space, like a third place where people could come to, especially like with COVID and work from home. There's been kind of a shift in how people go about their day. So there's been discussions about like what are other uses and things that the building might be able to share with the community. And that's the most accessible because of the way the slope comes. That's the most accessible part close to the ground along Holden Street. Whereas the southeast corner, because it slopes down, is higher up. And the thought there could be that as you're coming west, that could be like a more glassy corner. Maybe there's a stairway going up to a mezzanine. Maybe there's signage. Maybe that corner is something
kind of visible, right?
Yes,
Yeah, sort of visible.
exactly. That's the more visible corner. So if you think about opportunity for the building to make a certain statement or a more civic gesture, the southeast corner seems like an opportunity to do that. And then the along the alley, the idea that they could optimize loading, event staging when there are bands or events, coming in and out with materials, trash recycling, just being more thoughtful about having a staging area for that and putting stuff away, taking stuff out, things coming in and out of the building being done in a very thoughtful way. What we kind of sometimes call like back of house. The front of house can be made more beautiful and easy by having a thoughtful back of house. And then looking towards the courtyard, we see an opportunity to improve the accessibility of the ramp. So it's potentially within reach to adjust the grade or rethink the ramp so you have a more universal accessibility for design for all abilities by making that entrance and slope accessible. And there's the open patio. There were already some designs in motion, which we can use as is or build on about opening up doors to the patio and having an awning that opens out to the garden patio. And then finally, the last item is this idea of the civic scale. So the idea that we could build the building up to 30 feet and be more at the same height as the neighboring townhomes. And even though the footprint, the square footage of the building seems like the right square footage for the functional use and the number of people, there's an opportunity to go more vertically and perhaps gain some mezzanine upper floor balcony space and also have the building have a more civic presence. Anything else?
That's good.
Yeah. Okay, so then the last two slides are about, we'll just kind of lay out some initial thoughts and then I guess open up for discussion. But the first group of thoughts are about like broader aspirations. So what should the building say when you see the building? What kind of statement does the building want to say? Does it want to be just, a very simple, humble building that kind of fits in? Should it be something a little bit more experimental? Should it be something more civic? Like what is the building, what's the right spirit of the building that would be the best representation of the club and the HPIC spirit? Secondly, like how ambitious do we want to be, which is mostly a function of how much fundraising wants to happen. So we want to find the right balance of, we don't want to aim too low and not do enough that would set up the building for the next 100 years, but we don't want to aim too high and come up with something that's going to be very difficult to fundraise for. So part of the discussion for the community is how much ambition do we have in terms of expanding beyond what was already there. The footprint is going to be the footprint, but there are questions about the height and materials and just other design opportunities. Thirdly, new uses. What are other different ways the building could be used that aren't being used currently? That was the opportunity to think about that. And then finally, building a legacy for future generations. So how do we, as the current stewards of this building, set things up so in 100 years they look back and they think, oh, these people did this like really cool thing and way back in 2021. And then finally, this is the last slide. These were the survey questions. So we hope that everyone can go onto the survey link, which I think Kay was also sent in the chat as a reminder. And these can also be kind of discussion points about what is a community gathering space mean to you. If people have thoughts about community spaces where you've had positive experiences, what were some of the best elements of the building and the events that you remember? what were parts of the building that you wish were different? What's something that you would change now that we have this opportunity? What do you want to see when you drive by? And what kind of activities are you interested in? Because the building is really fundamentally about supporting the activities and the people that are going to be using it. So please fill out the survey online, and we'll be gathering those to capture for the next steps. So thank you. So I'll turn it back over to Kay to moderate. Kay, do you want us to keep the questions up here or for a bit? And if people have questions, we can turn back to the slides to reference them.
Sorry, thanks. I think maybe we could just take a moment to look at those survey questions, maybe, and give people some moments to think about them. And then I would like to probably propose that we take them down so folks can see better. And it's hard to have these meetings without being able to see ourselves, but I'm happy to paste them into the chat, right? And people, it's like Shannon has shared them in the chat right now. The format isn't so nice there, but they're captured there. And then I also pasted a direct link into the Google Forms document. So as we're kind of going through, if you want to open that on another screen on your own window, you could make comments on the side, and then those will get to Matt and Jody as well. But it is nice for everybody to hear, I think, what other people have to say. A lot of times that can spark some creativity. We've had some really good comments in the chat. Yeah, I see Shannon's going to put them in one at a time, maybe starting with the community gathering space. So just as we proceed, I mean, so we've had some changes since 2015 when we did a pretty intensive design charrette trying to imagine how we could make the building better. And since that time, we've gone through COVID, we've gone through isolation, you know, we've done this kind of hard turnaround and started being more involved in the community care space and trying to help others, using our property to help support people in the community that aren't doing as well for whatever reason. So, you know, what are the priorities that people have now? Have things changed for you all? It's super interesting to think about how you think this has changed us. So what a community gathering space might mean to us now could be different than what it was just a year or two ago. All right, so I'm going to shut up again, and just wave your hand if you want to comment verbally, or we could go back to the other questions in line, I guess.
Okay, I think let's start at the top. And, you know, I noticed, so Dakota sent out the first question. Let's just try to work the chat if that's okay. Some people had comments, of course.
Yeah.
But Dakota had a couple of questions, so I thought maybe we just open it up to Dakota and so she could ask both of her questions at once.
Sure, and I was typing in the chat because I was afraid I was going to forget as we were going. So thanks for, I know it can be a little bit distracting to get a bunch of questions while you're presenting. So just want to say thank you for that presentation. It's really nice to have the context. I hesitate to open with a functional sort of nuts and bolts question because I think it's really important for us to get into the aspirational and the conceptual ideas. I think there's so much scope here for this to be an incredible project. Thinking about a second floor, I do worry about budget a little bit with that because it will necessitate an elevator, I presume. And so my question is, I think it's important for us as we go along, since most folks are not familiar with the costs that are going to be associated with how aspirational or not do we get, to have cost estimates along the way within the design phases. And I wondered if a cost estimator is part of the design team as a sub-consultant, and when that would happen so that we can design, look at the reality of the cost, and regulate from there one or more times.
Yes, that's a great point, and I think that's really a key discussion at this time to have about what we do have some rough just backup envelope numbers, talking to Billy and Greg just about kind of industry cost per square foot numbers. So I think when we present next time, we can kind of share what those might look like and then bracket out the things that we have to do. There's the thing like the footings and the shell of the building, the walls and the roof. There's a certain minimum expenditure for that. And then where we have choices are how much do we do on the interior? What is the material of the roof and the windows? So we can bracket that out and understand the minimum that must be done to rebuild, and then how far do we want to push that? How aspirational do we want to go? Like you say, you get into elevators and a lot of details, and it's not necessarily the cooler it is, the more it costs, but generally the cooler it is, the more it costs. So, but it can be very cool and very basic.
Hi, this is Catherine. Can I piggyback on that cost question and just ask that as we try to, in parallel, talk about costs and our aspirations, remember to add the cost of staffing and maintenance of additional spaces or increased space. Because it's always nice to think of a second floor and conference rooms and everything, but then you have to think about who's going to run that, who's going to coordinate that, who's going to be the person that shows up with the keys. So if we could just make sure that cost stays noted in parallel, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes.
Laura Drake?
Thanks. In conjunction with that, thanks. I think the idea of, well, for me, an improved stage as a way to have revenue coming in. If the lighting is good and the sound is good and it's a nice stage, it could be rented out. And the same if there were classrooms, they could be rented out for various things. And perhaps we could hire a person to be able to run the keys and not have it be entirely volunteer at that point, so that it becomes, more rental possibilities for bringing in more revenue. I think that's my idea on that.
Monica has a question.
Yeah, along those lines, Laura, thank you. And thank you, Rhonda. I always think of what it's going to cost to run the club. I mean, in the old days, who was our audience? Who was renting? Things have changed and shifted with demographics and stuff. And I think, the question I have is like, what do we want the club to look like? Can we have a basic shell that we can dress up if someone wants to rent it for a wedding? How can they decorate it and make it look really, if they wanted to do a luxe wedding, could it be flexible? And I think that's one thing that we need to consider, because we got to figure out how much it's going to cost to run this place, and who's our audience? Who are we going to be bringing in? And that's just some thoughts. So thank you.
Nikki and Barry. Thank you, Monica. You guys have to unmute. There you go.
Got caught. Just my thought is we're going to have to raise a lot of money no matter what we do. Even a modest rebuild is going to be expensive. And in addition to a gathering space, if we're able to appeal to the community at large, to policymakers, to institutional philanthropy, we could have a little bigger project with a vision. And in addition to, just a couple of thoughts I've had is, in addition to the community gathering space, what we do well is music and food. And in the case of food, I would say we'd want to build off of the food security work that Odeta's done. That is perhaps one of the most meaningful things the club has ever done. And that might take the look of load-in, load-out facilities, storage for dry goods that could be external to the building, commercial kitchen. In the case of music, in addition to the performance space that we've had in the past, Maybe we have a state-of-the-art streaming capability that would not only allow music to be used, but community meetings. There would be an emergency factor there. I have this vision that it would be really cool if a young musician could play there and some teenager somewhere else in the city could watch it on their cell phone. And by making it more meaningful to a larger group of people, it might actually be easier to raise a larger amount of money than if we don't appeal to the community at large.
That's great. Thank you, Barry.
I think that's a great point, and Barry, thank you.
Great input.
And it was a good reminder. I think it's kind of cool that often when there's like real estate listings or things for Highland Park, they almost often say, you know, great community spirit, like, you know, lots of cool people. And I do think that Highland Park has a draw beyond, and you know, in Greater West Seattle and the peninsula, you know, from White Center, South Park, you know, Marginal Way, into Georgetown. So I do think that both the broader, you know, West Seattle community as well as beyond that, I think there is a draw into Highland Park, and I agree that that could be something that it's a question of how HPUC wants to support both the Highland Park community itself, but be a resource for neighborhoods even beyond that.
Blair, did you have a question? Okay, who's next? Who would like to ask a question? Michelle Witzke.
So kind of piggybacking on what Barry was saying, I'm wondering if we could take the approach of, if we can't raise all the money, like we could still have 2 floors and then raise the money for like the elevator later, and then just use the 2 floors for storage or other stuff, but just to give us some more flexibility, kind of like when you buy a house and it needs some remodeling, but you buy like the best sort of house you can, kind of like on that sort of philosophy. And then when you get more money, you do remodel and other stuff. But just to give us, because we might not be able to make all the money up front, but we might be able to get the most of it. And I'd like for us to dream as big as we can, because I think this community deserves that. And that's just what I have. Just what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Michelle.
Sonia, did you have a question? Okay, Laura?
I'm just, the idea, I think I like the idea of the main room having a high ceiling, the performance room, the party room that people can rent. And then, you know, maybe like the second floor is like a railing balcony situation with classrooms off that, so that you leave the center be a sort of a nice hall, but that you could actually have chairs sitting along the railing up there during a gig or during something, but then maybe there's some rooms up there that can also be rented off for various classrooms, you know, exercise art rooms or whatever, if people want to come in and use those as rentals, but so that it's not a 2-story building, because I think that main floor, and you took off that ceiling, and that was the original 1919 design too, was the high ceiling. And I don't think we should lose the fact that this is 100 years old, that this doesn't become a design that's too modern. It doesn't have some of that, what was there in 1919, that we pay homage to that as well.
Yes, I love that, Laura. Thank you. This idea of old and new, and how do you have a continuity of the building that embraces the history and the culture that was there, but also, you know, it's past, present, and future, the things that were there before, the thing where we are now, and also looking ahead. And I do think that idea of flexibility is really smart about setting up a shell that has flexibility for future uses and future infill.
Dakota?
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to Michelle for bringing that up, that idea of being able to grow into this building. So many times, I mean, we experience a project of building that we have to do additions onto in order, because it becomes so much more well-loved over time. And I think that, you know, that idea is also reflective of this community, that we're adaptable, that new programs are popping up all the time. And so I just wanted to say thank you for saying that, Michelle, as counter to my like, watch out for the cost, because I'm actually not usually that person to be like so concerned about cost. And then I also just wanted to say, since we're starting to get into talking about design features, that I think it's really important that we do have that really well articulated interior exterior connection, and that it's done in a big way, because when, you know, all of the many people on this call who are responsible for creating that garden space, it is so well loved, it is so well used. It's just extremely inconvenient to have like one parent inside drinking beer, talking to neighbors, and the other parent outside chasing kids, not being able to see outside, inside. So especially I think it's a lesson to be learned with COVID, that folks are learning how to use outdoor spaces in so many different ways. And so I think an integrated landscape, exterior, interior, and you all know I'm biased because it's a very important aspect of what I do as well. So I just want to reiterate that as being something that will make the building more flexible and something that we can grow into as well.
Matt, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. So anyway, I have been a proponent for a metal building. With the cost of wood, I've just thought that, you know, you need to look at other alternatives. And so I did look into metal buildings a bit, and I think that it is a viable option. And I'm all for building the shell and building the interior later. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Yeah, I think Nikki, that's a great point. I think we could do a quick, you know, with Billy and other construction professionals, we could do a quick kind of analysis of what the different types of building structures would cost. And I think as we've seen, the majority of the construction costs have to do with labor and time. So thinking about a design that can be put up quickly is really important. So getting that shell in a way that can be deployed efficiently. And I think that's one benefit of some of those metal buildings, is they are like pre-engineered and they can come together quickly.
Yes, they come as a kit.
Mm.
You just have to have a screwdriver.
Yes, and there are some advancements that we've been looking at with CLT, mass timber. There's a lot of work we've been doing with prefabricated buildings and mass timber buildings. So I think both with metal or wood, there's this opportunity of having kind of fast production and faster erection that gets the shell up there quickly, and then the interior can happen more organically over time.
Corey, you have a question?
Yeah, I actually, it's more of a comment. So are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think, you know, especially when looking at the green, climate zero, those initiatives going on, there's a lot of money going into those to support those efforts right now. So I think there is capabilities and possibilities for grants. If we're, you know, playing our cards right, we can potentially get extra money to do these upgrades that would essentially cost nothing, and then pay back for like utilities and stuff through the future. So I just wanted to bring up that point.
I think that's a great point, both with the construction of the building, but also the systems, the mechanical systems, solar panels. There's been a lot of advancement in geothermal, both air source, ground source, heat pumps. So I think there's an opportunity for to be very progressive with building, building systems, which also can help maintenance costs over time.
I think another example of that would be what you do with the ventilation system. If you're able to provide a space that is resilient against COVID and other diseases, and can deal with things like wildfire smoke, it can add the importance to the community if you actually have a place to go that has good air when no place else has good air.
Right. Right, that's a great point. Both being able to ventilate individual areas as well as the whole building unto itself to be able to close it off. Yeah, it used to be that most buildings in Seattle, Puget Sound area did not have air conditioning, but the use of air conditioning is increasing, not so much because of the heat, but more because of like that you mentioned, Barry, the wildfires, the ability to clean the air and filter the air internally. So I do think that that's a great trend for the future, that we should really have a future forward kind of idea about ventilation and healthy living for the future. Air quality.
That's right. Everybody breathes.
Any other questions or comments for Matt and Jody?
Yeah, this is Blair. I have a comment. In a couple of spots in the chat there, I mentioned the crawl space under the building. And I've been down there several times, and there are places where you can stand up and then places where you have to crawl. But if it is feasible to dig that out, to make a basement down there that could be used for other functions, I think this would be a good opportunity to explore that. And that's a case where it could just start out as bare bones basement and then be outfitted later for whatever uses might come up. The opportunity for access is at the southeast corner, the lowest elevation there by where the alley meets up with Holden Street. So
Yeah.
could be an opportunity to work in an entrance there, ADA compliant entrance, and use that space.
Thank you, Blair.
That's it.
Yes, yeah, and for cooling, the basements, have also natural cooling as well, so you can feed that into the air quality. And
You get bicycle
Yeah.
parking, wine cellar.
Yeah.
Nicole.
It could be so much more than a wine cellar.
Dakota, you raised your hand?
I did. I have a question that I typed earlier in the chat, so it's way back in there. But if there is a consideration for demoing the entire building, I guess my questions are, does that put us into a different permit submittal process that would take longer or not? Does it change the setback of the building? And whether you've done a code analysis yet, it makes me wonder, like, how many parking places do we need to maintain? How many parking places are required? And would we want to look at a total shift of the footprint of the building, or a semi shift of the footprint of the building? If we're saying, let's think, if we're, to Michelle's point, not limiting ourselves, it seems like changing the parameters to the greatest extent possible if it is beneficial to the project. That's my question. Are we considering staying in the same literal footprint even if we demo the whole thing, or is there benefit moving forward to opening that up?
Yes, that's a great question. I think the team had been discussing that as well. It's somewhat a complicated question because I think it involves both the footprint and permitting as well as cost. So I think the current thinking is to stay within the Seattle existing building code under a substantial alteration, which would then grandfather in the fact that the building is right against the sidewalk. I think if we completely scraped it new, then you'd be looking at new construction, and probably you would move the footprint, and then it would sort of be a different path that would have different requirements and that bring both opportunities, but also I think potentially different cost structure. So I think that's one of the things we'll present next time is some of those options of total rebuild, what that would mean, moving the footprint, what that would mean versus kind of keeping with what we have, and then having an understanding of like what that means cost wise and
Is it
time
there-
wise too. Time because some of these decisions also affect the timeline for permitting.
Is it faster to remodel versus build new?
Billy? I mean, I think generally, I don't know if Billy, if you want to say something, but I mean, it's been our experience that it's difficult to remodel quickly.
No, the short answer to your question, Barry, is no. But I think that right now that we're operating, I think right now, until we get into some really like some deeper pricing strategies or actually starting to itemize this out, we're just kind of operating under the assumption that the east half of that building, from the demising wall, from the community room to the dance floor, from that line is the building is pretty much raised, and we're starting over new from that line over. I mean, that would be certainly much easier than trying to fix the burned out structure on the east side. In terms of the structure to the west of the dance floor, I think that's salvageable, I mean my biggest concern, since it's something that I do almost every day, is like dealing with budgets. I'm just concerned that we're going to have a tough time coming up with the money to be overly aggressive with what we want to do with the building. I think that, I think that's kind of one of the most important points that Matt is and Jody are bringing up right now. Is what, you bring up the word ambition, Matt. Like what is it that we want to do as a community? Now we can become really ambitious with this, and really do something broader, like what Barry was discussing. How do we reach out to even a broader community or communities, and then try to get people involved in the fundraising aspect of this and go beyond Highland Park. Maybe we do something bigger here. If we did, I mean, that kind of maybe entails tearing down the whole thing, but I'm kind of, that would make me sad, I think. And then also, because if you do that, then we'd end up probably blowing out the one beautiful outdoor space that is so amazing for everyone, that courtyard, and that would be hard to salvage that by doing that to the building. I think we can do an amazing kind of quiet response to this. That's one of the reasons why we hired you, Matt and Jody, because you guys really speak to me that way with the work that you do. I think we're in a perfect situation right now to cut off what burnt off on this building and start from scratch, from foundation up, and it can be relatively affordable. And I think that I think that, just to let all of you know, Matt and I had already talked about this, about how we go about this during schematic pricing, and we were planning on kind of putting together some higher level pricing once we kind of landed on some strategies. I'm sorry, schemes. And so I think that one of the things that I know Matt wanted to accomplish during this meeting was, we need to kind of like try to come away from the meeting with a few overarching ideas. Is that true, Matt?
Yes, I think that, yes. So I think the overarching ideas of, and we don't need to decide necessarily this meeting or next meeting, but I think it's just an opportunity to understand, like, what does it mean to do a total rebuild? What might that cost? What does it mean to do a kind of half rebuild? What does that cost? And understand, the fundraising opportunities and the climate. And I think it'll be easier when we meet next time, because there'll be some designs to then see, A, B, and C options of what the building might look like and what the building would be able to do with a total rebuild if you move the footprint or totally redid it versus keeping some of the things that we have. I do think it's interesting to know. I think Laura mentioned it in the chat that the more historic, charming part, the original structure is the part that was lost. It was the 80s edition that remained, and it, we wouldn't necessarily say that the 80s edition had like a tremendous architectural vision behind it. So, I think it's valuable to keep from a functional standpoint, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like, and that's, people feel differently. It didn't feel to us like there was a lot of emotional attachment to that part of the building.
But to me, the thing that stands out to me as the emotional part of this building is kind of what was the operating program of the building and the scale of the building, also the adjacencies to the corners, the way the building operated relative to the corners, and the courtyard being on the courtyard being on the corner right there, the garden space, really welcoming the neighborhood. It just felt great when people would come to the club, people would be walking on the sidewalk and you'd see them approaching beyond the fence. And it was just the whole, I don't know. And I think the way that what's happened with the building, I think could lend itself to an interesting opportunity where the part that's right adjacent to the courtyard is kind of the lower portion of the building, maybe the smaller scale. And then on the new rebuilt portion, maybe it's in the closer scale to the townhomes you were talking about, Matt, maybe that's the way the building should be structured.
Yes.
And also, and the adjacent, like the current location of the dance floor, the current location, the kitchen or the kitchen and bathrooms being on the south, what do we do with these plan arrangements? Do we keep them that way? We move things around.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm thinking we're getting into some really nitty-gritty design. And I think I'm really thinking of some of the comments and Barry's in particular, where I think when we really get to understand what we want the function of the building to be, then we can then design to that, but also depending on what that function is, we may be able to attract other audiences and interests to helping to fund the rebuild. And one of the questions in the survey is, what kinds of activities are you interested in seeing or returning to the new HIC? I'm curious what you have to say on that.
Did anybody else have a hard time hearing her?
Sorry,
I
I was
catch
cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, Shannon, you were breaking up a tiny bit, but you did turn into the robot voice. But what I think Shannon was kind of wondering was sort of thinking about it more programmatically for a moment, and like stepping back a minute from how it looks and thinking like, well, what is it that we want it to be doing? That might help inform Matt as well. Like, what is it we're missing? She put the question in the chat, what kind of activities are you interested in seeing or returning to? Are there activities we haven't been known for in the past that we should be considering more? Those kind of questions, I think. Does that encapsulate that, Shannon? Maybe you can just wave or yell in your robot way.
She lost.
She has a hard connection.
Yeah, she dropped it in the chat. Yes. That's what, reiterating that question from a program perspective, what do we want the building to be, to function as? What will draw you to the club for an event, maybe that we haven't done in the past, or which ones would you like to see us continue doing?
So to be clear, are we asking people to comment on that now? I just want to make sure.
Yes, I think that was the idea. If there's things we haven't discussed, I see a lot of good inputs happening in the chat window, which is great because, you know, we will definitely be capturing these and looking at them afterwards. But also this is an opportunity to share your ideas in this forum.
Yes, yes, thank you. We're kind of watching the chat as we go along. So yeah, thank you everyone for being so generous with the comments there. Do you want to do butterfly garden?
Hey, if I could just say that when I was club manager, we had a lot of ideas for other stuff, but we were limited by a lot of things. And so I think it would be really valuable to take that approach that Shannon's saying and really just kind of put our heads to the grindstone and think about what we want to do. I mean, we've been successful with so many things, but there were other things that we wanted to do that were limited by space and mostly logistics at this moment I can think of. But I think to think of what else and then I think that's a really good way to think about the rebuild. I just wanted to say that.
Okay.
Sort of, this is like me just commenting as a citizen, not as a trustee, but I agree, Donna. Like, I think also sort of being able to, I mean, it's been a pretty sort of linear experience, like only one user at a time could be in the space. And is there a way to open it up to more than one user at a time? I think that we've often struggled with that because people certain times are super popular because of people's schedules and things like that. Other times the building just sits there empty. So would having more than one programmable space help with that? You know, and what other partners or ideas for programming can we look at that would engage parts of the neighborhood that we haven't engaged with in the past, and that could find that the club would be useful building for their own efforts as well, by maybe having two spaces or that could be used so that, you know, not everyone's just not trying to cram into Saturday nights, you know, or things like that, you know.
That's like the yoga classes being able to be there while maybe there's an art class upstairs and a little room in the back. But, you know, yeah, absolutely. People are looking for spaces to rent that aren't an arm and a leg, you know. And then if enough revenue is brought in, you have somebody who's managing that so that it's not all up to the volunteers.
Well, we've always had a paid manager, not always, but for many years, the manager is a paid position. But I was also thinking too about what Kay just said about breaking up the spaces where they could be used without staff, you know, like being able to lock down the kitchen area and lock out certain areas, just keeping in mind that, you know, there's plenty of people in the community that have the ability to self-manage while in the building, but, you know, we had to sort of create an equal program, you know, so we had paid staff at events, but just sort of keeping that in mind, I think too could be beneficial.
Yes, and I think another thing to think about is the size of the group. So, you know, what does it mean to have like a group of 100 versus a group of 20 versus a group of 5 versus a group of 2? So I think one thing that COVID era showed is that, you know, people need spaces to gather in different ways, different configurations. And so that opportunity, I think, is something to think about, like, yeah, configurability and flexibility. The more different types of spaces you have, you know, great buildings, I think, offer a great range of experiences and a great range of sizes of things that could happen.
Okay, you had a question?
I did.
It's Peter would like to speak.
If you have two spaces, you have to have the bathrooms to be accessible for both. And that's a simple thing. I mean, that would be a problem with the old space. You couldn't do that. So you'd have to have that, you know, I don't know how that works out. So just a thought.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna add this here to this forum, not as a board member, but as a volunteer who is participating in a lot of events. Just very, very thoughtful planning for storage of things that are important for rentals or events that we do. Anybody who has stayed after Corner Bar and Court and tried to put the tables and chairs away understands exactly what we're talking about. It's very challenging. And so knowing all the different use cases for how we use the building and the types of things we need to store there, especially now that we have a liquor license, being sure that we have a clear way to store, our food and drink and stuff like that. So just really thoughtful, slick storage for all the things that we need to store for events there.
Right, and easy storage for chairs and tables.
Could I just daylight also a comment Matt made? Is that okay, Matt? Do you want to say your comment?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, not Matt Wittman, Matt Hooks.
Oh,
Sorry, there's so many Matts. Do you want to say that, Matt? Do you want me to speak your comment about just sort of keeping it simple and
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I think just for those of you who don't know me, I'm a resident of the neighborhood for the last 50 years, and I'm also a general contractor. But it seems to me like the club has done a really good job of supporting the neighborhood. I'm also a huge proponent of staying within budget and timeline. And I know it's really easy to have grandiose ideas, which I certainly don't want to rain on the parade, but being conservative might be a good approach. If we change the footprint, that's going to change the amount of time, the complexity of permitting, budget. I mean, it'd be great to get this building back to work as soon as possible in my mind. I'm sure you all agree. But just to kind of take what we had, modernize the stage and sound that a lot of people have been talking about, a more modern kitchen. And earlier, I think it's been mentioned a few times, but making the crawl space into a full basement with access to the exterior, which if the ceilings are high enough in the basement, that space could be used for or finished out in the future, because I know that's another consideration, but it's a pretty cost-effective way of getting more space. And storage, of course. But once we start getting more things into the building, then the footprint changes. And there's just a whole bunch of other issues that happen when that happens.
Yes, Matt. Yeah, totally agree with all those. I think the art of the possible, how do we be artful within what we can get done and get this thing up and running so we can all enjoy it. Mm-hmm.
Could I just, again, there's some folks on this call that, I mean, a lot of us have a lot to say, and some folks like to just sort of listen, kind of get a drift of what's going on. Maybe you're hearing ideas expressed that agree with yourself, or maybe you're not hearing an idea that you have. So please feel free to type that in, or if you want to say something, this is a great opportunity for everyone to be heard, because Matt and Jody appreciate hearing more than one time what people find important, because it does help them prioritize. So feel free to just yell it out or chime in.
Well, I agree. I think we got to get, oh, hi. Can I speak? I think we need to get back up and running. I think the longer we wait, the more time we lose bringing in new people in the neighborhood. And I think people start to forget about us. And then, you know, as we are creatures of habits, especially with this COVID time stuff, we got to get back into people's brains and bring joy back in the neighborhood, like the bazaar, like the, you know, like think of all the things that I'm missing, the harvest dinner, you know, like all these things, they're becoming distant memories. And I'm afraid that that's, you know, if we don't get the club up and running as soon as we possibly can, it's, you know, we're farther behind the 8 ball, you know, so, I'm looking forward to getting involved more this year. Once we get up and running, get more involved, and you know, and I think that's what we need, is to just get on people's schedules, get it in their calendars, get it on their minds, get it on their radar, and you know, bring some life back into the club. And I really like being a part of the little real estate painting signs on the little haiku on the street, because it's one thing that changes and it's alive, you know. Other than that, every time I drive by, it's a dead building with a fence around it, you know, and I'm almost wanting to start painting on the plywood just to kind of zing it up a little bit, you know what I'm saying? So I think expediency is really, really important. I mean, I'd love to find somebody and have them give us $3 million and do something really cool like we'd all love, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know those people. So.
That's a great point. And is there a sense in this group on this call today of the fundraising arm of it? Because I think the fundraising arm will go hand in hand with the level of ambition we want to shoot for. So is there anyone on this call, or do we know someone who would be spearheading that effort?
Well, I think if you're fundraising, you have to have a vision. You have to tell people what they're giving to.
Right.
Yes, and I think that we will have materials that will get people to rally around. And so, do you think the approach would be we come up with the vision, and then based on that approach the fundraising strategy?
Well, what little I've heard, and this may be way off, but we're kind of looking at $500,000 minimum just to kind of get back to where we're at. Is that wildly inaccurate?
Right.
I mean, I don't know if we do. Kay, do we want to speak to any of the numbers? I think that they range somewhere between, yeah, I mean, it sounded like people were hoping to raise somewhere between like 750,000 and, you know, $1 million to 2 million. It could be in the millions, you know. Do people want to, you know, fundraise? Is it reasonable to think we can fundraise like $2 million on top of the insurance money, or is this too big of a reach? Or do we want to try to raise, you know, $1 million?
I think it's how wide a net you cast. You know, even for 750,000, I don't know that the immediate neighborhood we could get there. Maybe, but if you're able to cast a wider net, you could probably gather perhaps significantly more money. I don't know, but I think it is the sheer number of people and the sheer number of people in power you're able to appeal to.
But to your point, you can't do it without a vision to sell them. You can't write a grant proposal unless you know what you're delivering. You can't go out and fundraise for some amorphous thing that isn't, you can't make tangible to people.
I think you have to get people to fall in love with it.
I was going to say, I raised my hand to say just that. I think we have to really tell the story of this place and the history of this place and what it's meant to this community. And as this place becomes, as the events that this place held, as folks have said, as Monica said, become a distant memory, the way to keep that going is to center events and activities and calls to action around the fundraising to rebuild it, and to make sure that we're telling that story to those who are trying to get to participate in that in lieu of those events, and to other folks who we think will be able to support that, whether it's the wider West Seattle community or even outside of West Seattle, or to specific organizations that we think will be sympathetic to the community building story that we have to tell, whether it's a state agency or a nonprofit. I think about Forterra. I think about, other agencies that, or institutions that might be able to help. But even if we don't have a design that's done, if we're starting this process, telling that story and understanding what that is, I feel like that could be really powerful.
Yes, and like those community partners like Forterra, who has an interest in community land, and also they're in the process of building some CLT factories. So finding partners like that who may be willing to work with us to help subsidize or gift something that supports the community, but also has a support from a more regional support.
Okay.
Sorry, Peter wants to comment again.
Yep, there's the building, the museum in Ballard, which is like the Viking museum. What's it called?
Nordic.
Nordic. Anyway,
It's the National Nordic Museum now.
Yeah, and
I was on the design team for that.
I went there a number of years ago.
It's a beautiful building.
And I said, I saw the maquette, and I was really impressed by that, because I saw an object thing. I could say, this is what it's going to be. And I was really impressed. And because the other place was kind of like a little building. And I think that's what I think. Once you get a maquette, you got money. You got people that will say, this is what it is.
Yes.
So for that project, we did physical models that we brought to existing events like Yule Fest for that project. We did virtual images, so people could put on actual goggles to see in 3D where they would be. That's not a small effort, to produce those things. There's a definite design cost for those. But I mean, I think you're right. Like, if folks can feel like they're in the space, they become invested in it, and they're willing to give to make it a reality.
What are you giving? What are we making? What does the thing look like? Is it just like, what is this? And that makes, I think that's 50% of the giving idea. Is that, what is it?
Yeah. Something beautiful, Peter.
Yes, of course.
And that it matters to people.
Yes.
Yes. And
Matt, this is Nicole. I would be interesting to know, all this conversation is really good. And I think we are all in agreement here that having once we go through this and you share some preliminary designs and we kind of lock in on a designs, and there'll probably be, the sturdy design, and then the reach a little higher design, and then the very elegant design, right? Once we kind of lock in what we want to go after, where in your plan would something like that fit for us to have something tangible to go do all the fundraising for? Because clearly there's a step in there before we actually do break ground with construction, where we have to have all the fundraising done. So this is going to be a huge effort on our part to do that fundraising. So I'm just curious, from your perspective on your schedule and your timeline, where we would do that part of the fundraising.
I think,
and hopefully with a model in hand.
Yeah, so the next meeting we'll have in January, we'll have some options for the design. So we'll have some layout and shape options, and then in that discussion, like you say, we can have the sturdy option, the kind of medium option, and the aim for the stars option. And then I think we'll also have, in parallel with that, some general price tags for those. And I think as a community, we should decide, like, do we want to go after, which of those tracks do we want to go after? And then the next meeting, then we would have a more detailed design where you would start to see what it would actually look like. And then we'd have a little bit more cost data on that. And then I think if we're committed to saying, this is what we want to do, this is our vision, we think this is how much we need to raise to do it, then we would go into the full like rendering mode and make some beautiful drawings, make the physical model. And I would hope that we would get to that, by the spring, like hopefully by like March. Right? Because I think, Kay, is this true that we're on this cadence about meeting once a month?
I'd like to push this ahead. I mean, I feel like we've dallied around for 6 months and we kind of know where we're at now. Let's go.
Yeah, it feels like if we meet once a month and we're getting feedback and direction,
Yeah.
by the spring, we could, land on, what we feel like the building could be. And then, through the spring and summer, we could be in parallel fundraising and then also doing the permit and technical drawings.
David, you've been commenting some nice comments in the chat. Did you want to speak? You've got yourself off mute.
I found my thing was unplugged, sorry.
No worries. Nice to see you.
I'm just thinking in terms of the agile fashion minimum viable product. Somebody mentioned that we want to get back to operations as soon as possible. What would that take? And I understand the idea that we'd want to take the opportunity to dig a basement and or go up to a second story and add, solar panels and geothermal and everything else. I mean, these are good ideas, but if as a first stop, we should at least understand what's it going to take just to get into some kind of mode where we're operational. And that may not be beautiful. It may not be the end product, but it might give us an idea of how much that's going to cost, and also give us a reflection point on how much fundraising we need to start. That was just, and yeah, I agree. We want to move forward. But anyway, my 2 cents.
Thanks so much. Also, somebody else, Kim, mentioned, there are people that do professional fundraising. Just we would certainly, I certainly would find that helpful, but we have to find them. I don't know if we have a budget for that, but we'd have to fundraise for the budget for that. Maybe that's the most cost-effective thing, is fundraise for the fundraiser and then let them go for the big.
It does feel like the city of Seattle and the Puget Sound region has a great history of generosity around community-based projects, and especially sustainable projects, things that are good for the environment, things that are good for community. It feels like we're in an environment where there is a lot of money and generosity out there.
Kate, you mentioned in the chat that the insurance maxes out at $750, and my understanding is they've given us roughly half of that, but there's a lot of hoops to jump through. Could you describe for us what it takes to get to just getting $750 from the insurance company?
My understanding, and someone else could correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't been dealing directly with the insurance like some people, but my understanding is that you have to replace it. The value that we've been given in cash is what they consider to be the assessed value of the building. As a real estate professional would assess the building. And then they're willing to pay to replace the building, but they're going to replace in kind. So if we have, say, a window that's 2 feet by 3 feet, they'll replace a 2 foot by 3 foot window. But if we want it to be a 5 by 5 foot window, that extra cost has to be borne by us. And so there's hoops that have to be jumped through to realize all the potential out of that money. So we have to draw kind of equivalencies between what we're putting in to what we had in order to really dig into that remaining funding from the insurance people. So whatever contractor is hired for this will be facing that challenge as well, in terms of those kind of recouping that money.
Thanks.
Does that make sense? Uh-huh.
Mhm. Yeah, for instance, I believe there was no HVAC system in the building when it burned, so therefore they're not going to pay us for an HVAC.
They don't know that. And so I think they would replace the HVAC.
Okay.
But, and they also put in some pretty large money for audio visual and stage and things like that that far exceed what we actually had kind of as placeholders. So it's a little bit of a shell game, I think. So, but it's just that it's important that the contractor be able and willing to work in that kind of space, that system, right?
Okay.
To do that, to get as much money for us as possible.
Thanks.
David?
And David, you got your hand up?
Sure. So at one time I was on the Delridge Neighborhood Council. I think you were too, right? And they had all these grants and things like that. We had to survey grants. Most of it was mostly, like the crosswalk light, right? The whatever happened with this. Anyway, there might be money available in grant funding to the tune of hundreds, thousands, million, I don't know. But in the city of Seattle, and maybe something from the feds, I don't know. It'd be something to explore.
Yeah, I would offer David that we, this board over the years has become really good at grant writing, and we've submitted numerous grants over the years that have gotten funded. And so while we welcome those that are really good at that to help join our efforts, I think that would definitely be one of the strategies that we would deploy. I think what we're hearing here tonight and kind of what the board have been talking about as well is looking at how to do different phases and fundraising towards those targets. And you meet your next target, you open up the next phase of a project, for instance. And part of that fundraising strategy would be at applying for all these grants. We welcome anybody who's got skills in that area to reach out to us and help. But I feel really fortunate to be a part of a board that has either cut their teeth and learned like as part of the HPIC board or brought that skill set. But I'm constantly amazed how like Julie and others have been able to get numerous grants for us over the years.
Cool.
Thank you for bringing that up as a suggestion. We'll explore all options for sure.
Yes, and maybe there's like a blended approach of the insurance money, grant writing, fundraising, borrowing. I think there could be, phasing of all these things. I think that probably there's multiple channels to arrive at the total number.
Yep. Lemonade stands, bake sales, we take it all.
Everything.
So what can we do on the property currently to raise money? Anything?
Well, good question, Donna. I don't know if Julie wants to specifically address this question or Shannon. Julie, I see you there if you want to.
Well, at this point, our insurance, we're not insured to have any activities on the property because there's a damaged building there and it's just not, there's too many liabilities. So we're considering other options of going mobile until we can be on the property. And I don't know what it will take to, if the building has to be completely torn down, or I think it's probably, even if it's under construction, we can't be on site. So we're going to not be able to be on site for a while, as far as I know right now.
I do think it's a great point, though, that about the memory of that we all have about that place and being on site, and how can that be preserved. And I do think that we're in this window where we have that memory that we want to build on. So even if we're not doing anything on site, just as soon as we have a building design, we can certainly put up a giant rendering of what we're doing, and maybe there's other engagement that could happen, on the site without people physically being there. Maybe there's, message boards, or, art installations, or lighting, what are things that could be done, that still are consistent with the liability and insurance, but still create like the memory of this as a place. I remember, you could have artists, you could use it as a temporary, art canvas, things like that. I know when a lot of the COVID, stores got boarded up, there was a lot of public art that went up on a lot of the boarded up storefronts. That was nice. I mean, there's so many artists in this community. It feels like there's a lot of
There is.
Highland Park art people that we could reach out to, and I'm sure we'd have like tons of ideas.
I think also we've built extremely strong relationships in the local music community, and we've got a lot of support there, and that's something we can lean on as well.
We are also we're looking into being able to do things in the neighborhood that are HPIC events. We're just trying to understand how to do that, but I think we'll be able to figure that out, and that even though it's not on site, it'll still be HPIC and be close by. And I think it could keep us visible and keep people engaged doing that too.
Yeah, that was our latest plan, was to, I mean, if there's anything we've learned through the past 2 years, it's how to take whatever is thrown at you and find a way to adapt. And so, with COVID not being the worst, I mean, it's been really tough, but then to add to that of, this fire, it's just, I think we've become pretty thick-skinned in the past 2 years. And while we all, I think, have grieved the loss of the club and its state that it was in our own way, what I'm most proud of is just how resilient, the board is, and our volunteers and the community to say, okay, what's next, right? So even as we just took this latest disappointment of learning that we can't have something on the property at all, where we had been planning this whole concept of Camp HPIC, where we can host pop-up events, fully contained pop-up events on, in the parking lot, for different things. Now we realize we can't do it on property, but we've already started thinking, okay, where can we do it? So can we take this concept of Camp HPIC and take it mobile now? Can we do club events hosted by HPIC, with the volunteers that we have, and the, music and food and drink and all the things that we can, that we've become pretty good at hosting over the years, and other community events. It's not just around that, but other like types of events. Can we take our concept mobile and continue to do, be a presence in the community and do fundraising as well? So while we're still in the infant stages of exploring what the options are there, I'm confident that in 2022, we're gonna come up with some great things where we can still, we can be a presence and continue, but really in earnest start the fundraising activities. I think we've been just trying to discover where we're at and where we need to go right now. And so where I feel really good, I know it's taken us a while. Me personally, I'm just really happy at where we're ending the year. We have a great, passionate architect team that's going to help bring us into the next phase. We have something like 30 plus people on this call that care enough to spend their time here to learn more where we're at and to provide their inputs on where we need to go. We love that and value that so much, because we try to just be representatives of our community. So we appreciate everyone taking the time to provide their input and their ideas, and really just solidify, how important it is for us to get us back up and running. I think that's the common theme that I'm hearing, is that sense of urgency, because people want to be able to gather again at the space. So I'm really hopeful as we go into 2022 that we'll find a way, not just a good plan for rebuilding the club again, but also to to continue our journey of, being a community gathering place. I put that in quotes because it may change, but to still offer that as a place for the community. So I'm looking at the time, Kay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like go into this little diatribe. I would just had to speak what was on my mind, and I'm just hopeful after this event. But it is 8:40. I don't know if you had a specific end time, but unless there's more burning questions that want to be asked, it might be a good time to give people their evening back.
Right, and Rhonda's thoughtfully put the link again to the survey in the chat. Those questions are more formalized. I think I personally appreciated hearing everybody's voice tonight, though, and we try to frame those questions, but we didn't want to end up sounding like an agency or something. So there's also a question at the bottom that says, just ask anything you want to do, or just comment, say whatever you want to say. And Matt and Jody promised they're going to look at all of it, and the board will also look through those and try to represent as well as we can what we're hearing. But we do rely on all the members and concerned citizenry and neighbors and what have you. And also just reminding everybody to check your membership, make sure your memberships are paid up for the year. When we do come down to vote on our path forward, the members will be the voting agents due to the bylaws of the club. So we welcome anybody in the community to comment on our survey. It's not a closed survey, it's open to all. And we really appreciate Tracy pushing that out from the blog perspective. That's really helpful too. But when we do make our decision, we will be driven by membership voice. So get in there and get those memberships up to date. Like me, I forgot, whatever. Yeah. So easy to forget.
Yep, just a few closing comments. So it's put in there in the chat, but please take the survey. Even if you provide a comment tonight, maybe you thought of something else, please take the survey. It closes January 7th. Please tell your neighbor, a stranger on the street, whoever, to take the survey. Somebody that, the more voices we get heard, the more that we feel like we've really truly captured, the input of our community. And that's everything to us. So please help us promote that and get as much input as we can. Closes January 7th. And then our plan right now is for our next town hall. So town hall number 3 to be January 19th. And that's where I believe we'll regather and Matt and Jody will go through the preliminary design. I'm not sure exactly at what level, but I don't know if it's a concept or I'm assuming it's fairly high level because that's not too far down the road, but
yes, yeah, it will be kind of high level conceptual layout of the floor plan. I mean, our general working assumption is that the functions of the floor plan are basically similar to what we have today. We'll, based on the survey and feedback from tonight, we'll see if there are additional floor plan. But basically, it's flexible space with bathrooms, a kitchen, and then potentially some circulation stairs / elevator to get up and down, depending on basement and upper level options. And then there'll be some different thoughts about what to do with the shape of the building and windows and access points. So, and we'll try to structure it in a way that there's kind of a minimum viable product idea, base level, medium level, aim high, and we'll have some just general high level construction cost per square footage numbers with those, and we can decide how high people want to go.
Awesome. Great. I think we all look forward to that very much. And then I'm just going to mention one other thing while we had for anybody here, and it'll be, posted on our website soon too. We have been trying to prepare to have a New Year's Eve event at the club, but as you just learned, and as we learned, it's not possible due to our insurance. And so we still plan on doing a version of our Not So Silent Night Parade, which is just a way for our neighbors to gather and march to the neighborhood and ring in, good cheer and light and New Year happy thoughts. We're still working out some details of that in collaboration with the Highland Park Community Store or Corner Store, Highland Park Corner Store. So please look for more information to that or on that so that we can still find a way to ring in the new year together. I think that's our next opportunity to gather and celebrate everything that is Highland Park and community for us. So.
Well, Jody and I are very thankful for all of your comments, and thank you for everybody for speaking out and for being here. And yeah, super grateful to be part of this community and looking forward to next steps.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Kay, did you have any closing comments?
No, it's great. Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up. It's such a great turnout.
Yeah, we love it.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
thank you.
everybody. Good night.
Thank you for
Good
coming
night.
through all the faces, and great to hear everybody's voices. Thank you for your attention.